Grow your career in a high-demand field at Roger Williams University's Extension School in Providence. Their trade-focused programs include apprenticeships, professional credentials, and associate degrees designed to help you build in-demand skills for today's workforce. With affordable, flexible courses that fit your schedule, you can turn your talent into a career that builds something bigger, your future. Visit rwu.edu/ext to start your path today.
From the Boston Globe, this is Rhode Island Report. I'm Ed Fitzpatrick. Welcome back to the podcast where we bring you big conversations from our very small state. Attorney General Peter Neronha has been busy these days, between filing a lawsuit challenging the Trump administration's decision to halt the Revolution Wind project to criticizing the latest health insurance rates. He's also placed second in a recent poll for the Democratic primary for governor, and he hasn't even decided to run yet. He's here in the studio to give us an update. Attorney General Neronha, thank you for joining us today.
Sure, Ed.
I recently wrote about how Rhode Island Secretary of State Greg Amore rejected the Trump administration's request for a voter registration list containing personal information like Social Security numbers, birth dates, things like that. Do you agree or disagree with his decision?
Well, we helped him get there, so we were acting as counsel for him. And so it's the right decision under the law. That's what we counseled. The federal government may sue. They sued other states that have taken the same position, Oregon and Maine.
Yeah, they just sued Maine and Oregon the other day.
Correct.
And the secretaries of state. At that time, the Assistant Attorney General, Harmeet Dillon, said states simply cannot pick and choose which federal laws they comply with, including our voting laws, which ensure all American citizens have equal access to the ballot in federal elections. So what's your response to her?
Yeah, the federal government can't either. And we are in compliance with federal law. This administration thinks the federal law is whatever they say it is. Well, that's not correct. The executive branch doesn't pass the laws. The Congress does. Mm-hmm. And we interpret those laws, I'm convinced, correctly. We're going to win that case, as will Oregon and Maine.
You expect to be sued, Rhode Island?
Oh, we'll be sued, and we'll win because the federal government has to follow the law, too. They can't ignore the law any more than we can. We're not ignoring it. We're following it.
And what's the key legal argument why you're following the law?
Well, because there are federal statutes that require us not to share personally identifiable information for lots of reasons. That information, when it falls into the wrong hands, it's putting their information out there where they can be the subject of identity theft and defrauded. That's also why we have the laws which allow us to withhold that part of the voter rolls. And look, the larger point is, what's the point of what the federal government is doing?
Yeah, why are they asking?
Why are they asking?
Yeah.
They're asking because this is the same administration that believes the election in 2020 was stolen. The election wasn't stolen. That's been debunked, obviously. As someone who has been both U.S. attorney and attorney general that has done election fraud investigations, the amount of election fraud is very, very, very small. And when it happens, we catch it. It's typically citizens voting in two states. In Rhode Island, it's typically Florida. We prosecuted a few of those cases. We find it, we prosecute it. It's not a significant problem. And the president knows this. What he wants to do, what his agencies want to do with that information, it's not clear to me. I have some suspicions, but
does that have to do with they're looking for proof that undocumented residents voted?
That's what I sense. Or maybe more broadly, they simply want to use that information as part of their immigration efforts. That's a separate question.
Yeah, it's been shared with Homeland Security.
Right.
It's been reported.
But that's not why we're withholding it. We're withholding it because the law, as we interpret it, requires us to do so. So that's what we're going to do.
So I also want to talk to you about the lawsuit that you and the Connecticut Attorney General filed to challenge the Trump administration's decision to halt the Revolution Wind project. What's the latest on that litigation, and when do you expect the U.S. District Court here in Providence to act?
Well, I hope soon. We filed our motion for a preliminary injunction yesterday.
We're talking on September 18th.
Right, yeah. So we filed it yesterday. So the way litigation works for your listeners that may not be as steeped in it as some of us, we filed our complaint a few weeks ago. Now we want the court, through our preliminary injunction motion, to issue a court order which requires the federal government to take back its stop work order effectively so the project can proceed. Why? Because every day that those ships and those workers aren't working on this project endangers the project as a whole. Why? Because you only get the equipment you need, mostly these really large, odd-looking ships that you see out there in the bay. They don't grow on trees, those ships. They're needed elsewhere. You only get them for so long. We can't wait till the end of the case 2 years from now to get this thing turned back on. If we don't get it turned back on, we're going to lose the equipment. The company may have to walk away, and we don't get the energy that we're relying on to keep our grid stable and reliable and that we need. We're counting on this energy. We don't have a way to replace it at present. So we need that clean, reliable, cost-effective in the long-term energy to come online, and we need that to happen soon, next year. And the way to ensure that that happens, Ed, is to get a court order that requires the federal government to stop messing around with this 80% completed project.
My colleague Chris Gavin wrote about a separate lawsuit filed by the project's developer down in Washington, D.C. And in court papers, the Trump administration said the stop work order was issued so the Department of the Interior could assess the project and whether it may be impacting or will impact the environment, national security, and other reasonable uses of their waters. So what's your response to that?
They did it already. They did it over a course of nearly 10 years. All of these issues were addressed by the same agencies within the last several years. All of the permits were issued. And then Rhode Island went forward after the federal government cleared it, and we issued our permits. And in our energy policy, we relied on the federal government's decision. So the federal government can't engage in irrational decision-making where they're going back and forth like a willow tree in the wind. That's not how government action should and can work. So my answer to that is they're made up issues now when we took them to task for, in the original stop work order, saying nothing about why they were stopping it. It's much like the funding cases we brought, Ed, where the federal government just says, well, we're not going to give you the funding that Congress allocated to you while we think about it. Well, while they're thinking about it, damage is done. And so we don't have time for them to think about it. They've already thought about it. This is a broader attack on wind energy. We know that. And so these issues are just, if you'll pardon the pun, trumped up issues to try to stop this project. And we're confident the court's going to see it that way.
In another recent development, the State Office of the Health Insurance Commissioner has approved health insurance premium hikes of 17.6% for the small group market, 19.3% for the large group market, and 21% for the individual market. Your response?
Yeah, really bad policy. We recommended no increases. Those increases, Ed, in the individual market, for example, are going to comprise 30% of household income. 30% of household income is what these increases are going to mean. So let's think about what 30% of household income means. The average Rhode Islander makes about $83,000, according to census information. So when you take 30% of your income and you use it for health insurance, where do you find the 30% for housing? That's typically what the recommendation is for housing. You pay no more than 30% for your housing costs. We know housing in Rhode Island is already expensive. So these two things are interlinked. When you're paying that much for healthcare and that much for housing, what's left? And then what choices do you have to make? We're convinced, the office is convinced, and our economists that we hired from the Brown School of Public Health are convinced that this will lead to Rhode Islanders choosing not to insure themselves because they're going to have to make economic choices because their health care, if they choose to get it, would be 30% of their income. You have to pay a tax, but the tax is less than $1,000 typically.
So we'll end up with people who are uninsured.
Correct. And they'll show up in the emergency rooms that are already overburdened when their health care gets to that point, and we'll end up paying more. So the policy choices by the commissioner, with the governor's support, he is, after all, the governor's commissioner, have ignored our warnings for years that we have to look at healthcare differently. Making healthcare policies through the Office of the Health Insurance Commissioner is just the wrong way to go about it. And the governor's call now for relief for Rhode Islanders is ironic because the governor has been absent on this issue for the 4 to 5 years that we have been objecting to these increases because we know affordability for Rhode Islanders just isn't there.
Now, the Rhode Island Current reported that Health Insurance Commissioner Corey King took exception to your characterization and noted that the Brown University health economist you just mentioned that you hired to review the process said the process was important and effective. So
Yes.
what do you say to that?
Yeah, what I say is read our economist report. I think the commissioner knows he can't defend his decision-making, and so he pulls what our economist says out of context there. What our economist said, and it's in writing, in his report and in our brief to OHIC, is when health insurance costs, as this commissioner has authorized, hit 30% of household income, people stop buying health insurance, and that's bad for everybody. So look, the commissioner feels under the gun. That's where he belongs. His decision making has put Rhode Islanders in a tough spot. He's done it in this vacuum of keeping insurance companies solvent, as opposed to looking at healthcare more broadly, including affordability. Frankly, he deserves criticism, and I don't hesitate to do it.
And just to explain to people, those rate changes don't affect the 65% of Rhode Islanders who are covered with employer-sponsored coverage, but they do affect how many people?
170,000. And that makes it even worse, Ed, because that means a slice of the population, less than 20%, 17% if the population's 1 million, is bearing the burden more than their peers. And the commissioner doesn't take that into account either. And that's why the whole way we're doing insuring our population needs to be completely rethought. It's why I've been talking about healthcare for as long as I have. We keep trying to fix healthcare on a transaction-by-transaction basis. Let's look at insurance rates every year. Next time there's a merger, let's think about healthcare. You can't do it that way. You need to go back, break it down, and start over. And that's what we've been calling for a long time. But the person who controls the agencies that have the ability to do that is the governor, because he controls EOHHS. He controls the Department of Health. He controls the healthcare commissioner. He controls the Medicaid office. And his failure to make progress is what's hurting healthcare in Rhode Island right now. And there's no escaping it.
We'll have more with Attorney General Peter Neronha after a quick break.
If you're a future scholar or family starting the college search, let me tell you about Roger Williams University. They offer a real-world education that lets you combine your major with what you love. Create powerful combinations like sustainability and marine biology, or architecture and graphic design, or business and construction management. And their campus in Bristol, Rhode Island is one of the safest college towns in the U.S. Trust me, you'll be hooked by the views the moment you set foot on campus. Visit rwu.edu and discover Roger Williams University.
Audible's romance collection has something to satisfy every side of you. When it comes to what kind of romance you're into, you don't have to choose just one. Fancy a dalliance with a duke, or maybe a steamy billionaire. You could find a book boyfriend in the city and another one tearing it up on the hockey field. And if nothing on this earth satisfies, you can always find love in another realm. Discover modern rom-coms from authors like Lily Chu and Ali Hazelwood, the latest romantasy series from Sarah J. Maas and Rebecca Yarros, plus Regency favorites like Bridgerton and Outlander. And of course, all the really steamy stuff. Your first great love story is free when you sign up for a free 30-day trial at audible.com/Wondery. That's audible.com/Wondery.
Speaking of the governor's office, I want to get your thoughts on the URI poll that just tested a hypothetical four-way Democratic primary for governor.
Yeah.
Governor Dan McKee was ahead with 18.5%, but you were second with 15%. Helena Foulkes was at 14.3%, and House Speaker Joe Shekarchi was 7.3%. So you're already within the margin of error.
Yeah.
Are you going to run or not?
Well, it's not bad for a guy who's not running and hasn't raised any money, right?
Are you not going to run?
I don't know what I'm going to do, Ed.
You still don't know?
I don't. I'll know by the first week of October. I guarantee you that.
Why the first week of October?
Because it has a certain symmetry to me, which I'll, get into the first week of October. And it's also the start of the fundraising period. Look, I don't want to ask people for money to support me if I don't know what I'm going to do. Other candidates don't have that problem. I like Helena a lot, but she's been running for governor for 5 years, effectively. I've had a job to do in that 5-year period, and my thoughts have been there. The governor is obviously the incumbent. Look, it's not a surprise to me, frankly, because the work of the office, the team that I've led has done amazing work for Rhode Islanders. And Rhode Islanders see that. I think that those poll results are a reflection of the office as a whole as much as they are about me. But look, the public has seen me in action for 15 years as U.S. attorney and as attorney general. And there's at least a portion of them that would like me, I guess, to go do something else. I still have to figure out if that's what is best for me and my family.
I mean, you had the press conference the other day at your office and about Revolution Wind, and you talked about how your office has recovered nearly $650 million for Rhode Island that would have been lost if you hadn't sued the Trump administration. So is that what you would run on if you ran for governor? That work?
I think if I ran for governor, I would run on results. If you look back over the course of my career, I don't want to sit here and talk about it all. But look, $500 million from Google when I was U.S. attorney put a lot of bad guys in jail, including public corruption cases. In other words, show the kind of leadership to stand up to people, big companies or bad politicians that were hurting Rhode Islanders. I've stood up to Trump. We've done, I think, great work in healthcare to try to save our 2 safety net hospitals that are in trouble. We'd be far worse off if we hadn't done some of the things that we've done. We brought back $360 million, I think, in opioid monies to try to address that crisis. I mean, I think there is, again, because of the people I've had the good fortune to lead, a record of achievement there that I'd run on, Ed. But, I have to decide whether that's how I want to spend my 60s, and I just haven't figured that out yet.
Yeah,
but I'm close. I'm close to an answer.
Well, we're close to October. If you want to announce on the podcast, go right ahead. But it seems to me, listening to you, that you would love to run for governor. You're talking about healthcare and issues that a governor could address, but you think you don't have enough money with just $119,000 in your campaign account. Is it just the money that's keeping you from running?
No, because I could raise the money, and people have offered.
You could raise enough to compete with Helena Folks?
Sure.
And Joe Shikarchi?
There's no competing with somebody who can put $2, $3, $4 million of her own money in the race.
Right, you don't have that kind of money.
No, but you don't need it either. Those folks, somebody like Helena has to go find something to talk about and get your attention, Ed. I'm here because of the work we're doing. And Rhode Islanders know that too. So look, I can raise the money. I'm confident of that. I just haven't asked people for money this year. I'm not a politician who feels comfortable asking people for money that I'm not sure I'm going to use to run for office. I just don't feel comfortable doing that to my friends and my supporters. But if I turn the lights on, I'll get them on fast. In my first campaign, Ed, for Attorney General, I had to raise about $350,000 in that race. I raised $200,000 in the first quarter, more than anybody else, including this governor and his competitor. And then I was done fundraising by April for a race that wasn't over until November. So whatever I need, I'll get. I know I'll need more for governor, obviously, but I can get that. I'm not worried about that.
If you don't run, what are you going to do? Are you telling me you'll be right off the coast of Beavertail in your sailboat?
Yeah, I'm going to read a lot of books. I'm going to sail some and find ways to participate in public life, perhaps. But my sons are doing really well, but they're too far from home. I have one in Dallas and one in Chicago. They're not down the street, like I am from my parents. And I know that if I want to see them on a regular basis, I'm going to have to travel. And it's, it's hard to do that in a job like this one or the governor's job. So that's what comes first and foremost to mind. And then, my wife is around my age. We'll both be around 63, 64 when my term as AG ends. And so what do we want to do together in that important decade of the 60s? Nothing is guaranteed you, as we all know. I just lost a family member in Germany. One of my first cousins just died in a highway accident yesterday. Just my age, born 5 months after me, my closest first cousin. You just realize that time is not guaranteed you. So I want to choose really carefully how I spend the next decade.
If you don't run, who would you back in the governor's race? And I'm assuming Governor McKee.
Probably not. I think we need better leadership, more effective leadership, more tuned-in leadership, frankly.
But give me your thoughts on whether or not Helena Folks or Joe Shikarchi would make a good governor.
I think they make better governor than this governor. I think the speaker has a record of achievement as a speaker. He's been in government. I think that's important. I think there's a lot about Helena that I admire, and I think she's smart. I think she has a good way about it. I think she really cares about Rhode Islanders. I do think that experience in government is important. It's not necessary, but it's important. I say that because I've been in government working for leadership where they didn't have experience in government, and then you really have to rely on the people around you when the most important decisions come around, and not having that experience can really be a detriment to the decision-making process. I'm not saying it can't be overcome, but I found part of my confidence in making decisions as Attorney General and as U.S. Attorney came from being an assistant U.S. Attorney and as being an assistant Attorney General. And I feel like, mostly through the work of our civil division the last 5 years, I thought I'd come in as AG and be a prosecutor. I spent much more time on the civil division issues, the environment, climate, healthcare, energy, insurance, things we're talking about, that I have a good sense now of where government is failing Rhode Islanders and where it could be much, much better. And so the ability to attract leadership and understand government, I think, would help a candidate. I haven't made any decisions. I haven't spoken to them about that. Of course, Speaker Sakarchi hasn't even entered the race himself
That's
yet.
true.
So
That's true.
if he does. So there'll be time for that if I don't run.
On the day Helena Folks announced McKee launched the digital ad saying not all drug deals look alike on Helena Folks Watch, as president of CVS, the company fueled the opioid crisis, prioritizing their own profits. What did you make of that?
Well, it's fairly predictable, right? I mean, the governor is nothing if not predictable. But look, CVS did play a role in the opioid crisis. It's why we went to court along with my fellow attorneys general to hold them accountable, along with other pharmacies, Walmart and beyond, Walgreens. So the company had to account for that conduct. Look, you don't get a pass because you're the hometown team. The hometown team has to play by the rules too. It's why we've sued CVS as part of our healthcare approach as a pharmacy benefit manager, because we believe they've driven drug costs up, drug costs are a big part of the problem. So really predictable by the governor. I don't know what role he played in the opioid crisis or fixing it. He'd probably tell you he got cities and towns to sue. I'll tell you, as Attorney General, that made our settlements much more difficult to manage. You know, when you're the Attorney General representing everybody across the state, and then Johnston is also suing, representing the people of Johnston. So there were two entities representing the people of Johnston. That complicated things. So, look, predictable. Whether it lands with the voters coming from him is, I guess, a question that we'll have to wait and see the answer to.
And finally, your office received a lot of attention, to put it mildly, when Special Assistant Attorney General Devin Flanagan told a Newport police officer he would regret arresting her as she was taken into custody. Why do you think that body camera video from that encounter went viral?
Oh, it's an abuse of power. Ms. Flanagan knows that. The footage was pretty raw. Look, it gets under people's skin when people in power. And look, Devin Flanagan doesn't, in the scheme of things, in my office, it's pretty far down on the spectrum of assistants. She wasn't managing anybody. She was one of my managers. She was in my appellate division. Important job, no question. Mm-hmm. But whether you're at the top like me or you're nearer the other end of the organizational chart, when the public sees somebody abusing their public authority in the way that she did, they get angry. And look, I don't blame them. I was angry too. And it called, in my view, for a strong sanction, which we delivered. And my hope is that she'll come back stronger from that.
If you were embarrassed and angered by it, why didn't you fire her instead of placing her on a 6-month unpaid leave?
It's much like sentencing a defendant. If you're a judge or if you're a prosecutor making a recommendation, there's no calculator where you can put in all the factors and it punches out a number for you. So you try to do what in your heart feels best. It's why I took some time to think about it. I wanted to get away from the immediate noise, if you will, and really think it through. But taking into account that Ms. Flanagan had other than this serious lapse, had a strong record in the office, was well respected by the bench and the bar. I knew she could come back and do good work for the people of the state. I decided that losing her pay for 6 months was a strong enough hit. And I think even apart from the loss of income, to be embarrassed among your peers, the office is really a family. Leave me out of it. We come and we go as attorneys general. There are many career people there. I think that when we embarrass ourselves individually, we embarrass the office. It's not just me. It's not just Ms. Flanagan. It's all 250 employees. She hurt herself there too. And I think that will be something she has to come back from as well.
What will happen to the cases she was handling while she's on leave?
They'll be transferred to other people in the appellate unit. And that's part of the burden you bear, right? That you put more work in the hands of other burdened prosecutors. But we'll get the work done. They'll get the work done. I'm really appreciative of their efforts.
And what's the main lesson others should draw from that incident?
Look, we all have bad moments.
Yep.
You should always assume there's video of it. And if you're in public life, you just have to be on your best behavior. All of us get frustrated. All of us think at times, particularly when we've had one or two more cocktails than we should have, that things aren't going the way they should. You really got to understand, number one, don't have too many cocktails. Number two, your conduct is being watched and you should always be on your best behavior. No matter, I can say that a million times. We have these rules of the road that have been in the office for, I don't want to say generations, but they were there when I was in the office 25 years ago for the first time. We have trainings on the rules of the road. Inevitably, it happens. Somebody makes a mistake and you have to deal with it and then you move on.
Attorney General Peter Neronha, thank you for coming in today.
Thanks, Ed. It's so great to be with you.
Rhode Island Report is a production of the Boston Globe. Today's episode was produced by Megan Hall. Our music is from APM. Be sure to follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. I'm Ed Fitzpatrick. See you next week.